And hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual presentation of Forever Free with author Tracy Swinton Bailey. We'll be accepting audience questions in this event. So if you have any questions for Dr. Bailey, just use the Ask a Question feature at the very bottom of the screen. You can also vote for any questions you'd like, and they'll make their way to the very top of the list. Also, please consider supporting Vroman's Bookstore tonight by purchasing a copy of Forever Free. To do so, just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer's screen. It'll take you to our website where you can complete your purchase. And Vroman's Bookstore is the oldest independent bookstore in Southern California. So any amount of support you can show us, we'd greatly appreciate it. All right, so with that said, let me introduce our speaker for tonight, and then we can get started. So Tracy Swinton Bailey earned a PhD in education with a specialization in language and literacy at the University of South Carolina in 2013. She began her career as a high school English instructor and went on to found Freedom Readers, an after-school and summer literacy program that was designed and implemented to support families in low-income areas and assist children in achieving their academic goals in reading. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to turn my camera off and enjoy the talk, everyone.
Good evening. I'm very thrilled actually, to be here with you this evening on what is the birthday of my book, Freedom Readers. I'm excited to talk to you about it. It is a memoir and it is a call to action. And so I think I want to talk to you a little bit about the memoir part before we get into the call to action. I have always been surrounded by books. I cannot think of a time when I didn't have books in my life. I can't even tell you where my parents would have gotten these books, but I remember being read to, especially by my father, when it was time to go to bed. And some of my favorite books were Dr. Seuss books, Berenstain Bears. I remember reading a book called Lyle Crocodile. And one of my favorite books when I was growing up is a book called There's a Monster at the End of This Book. And it was a Sesame Street book with Grover in it. And he would say, please don't turn the page. And he'd give us all of these reasons that we shouldn't turn the page. And by the time we got to the end of the book, we found out that he was the monster. And it just cracked me up. That book was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen. And I always begged my father to read that book for me again and again and again. When I was growing up in the 70s, I don't think that he had access to many books that featured little girls that looked like me. So he surrounded me with the books that he could find, and I absolutely loved them. But at the same time, in my house, we had copies of Jet magazine and Ebony magazine and lots of different reference books where I could learn about African American people of excellence that had accomplished a lot of great things. So not only was I surrounded by children's books, but I always had a way to see myself on the pages of books. So what I'd like to do this evening is share with you some of the books that we share at the Freedom Readers program. The 70s was a while ago, and I'm so pleased to say that now there are a lot more books out there that kids can find that will be a mirror for them if they are children of color. So the first book I want to talk to you about is called I Am a Kindness Hero. And so we talk a lot about we talk a lot at Freedom Readers about our place in the world and how we can make the world better and how we can use everything we have, all of our resources, to just try to move along an agenda of friendliness and peacefulness and happiness. So this is a book that we like to explore. This next book is called Kalamata's Kitchen, and this one is about cooking. And I wanted to share this one because at Freedom Readers, we like to look at books that touch on a lot of different topics. And I know that there are some young people in our group who are aspiring to be chefs. And so now they can pick up a book and find out information about being in the kitchen, ingredients, recipes, that kind of thing, and use their reading skills for something that they may want to engage in as a career. Now, this book I'm super excited about, and I really like this author, Carol Boston Weatherford. I've read many of her books, but we know that there is a big movie coming out very soon about Aretha Franklin. And at Freedom Readers, we do like to take the time to make connections between what it is that we're reading and what we can go to the theater and see. We talked a lot about the book that highlighted the women that were astronauts. And I know that there was a great big movie around them. They weren't astronauts, but they really did a lot of the math that had that gave the astronauts what they needed to get to outer space, Hidden Figures. So now we can look at Aretha Franklin and talk about her life as well. This book is a special one. It's called I Love My Hair. I even read this one to my little girl when she was small. She's 17 now. But what we are trying to do is make sure that there are a lot of books that contain images of young girls and young people so that they can just really see themselves and understand that who they are is special and it's beautiful. Here's another book we like to share, I Affirm Me, The ABCs of Inspiration for Black Kids. This is Ada Twist, Scientist, which allows all the scholars at Freedom Readers to see themselves being scientists, to think a little bit about who they can become. And this book is called Silway. It's actually one of my favorites. I enjoy the pictures by Vashti Harrison, and I really love this story. In the memoir section of my book, I write a little bit about identifying with the main character of this book, about feeling like just not being comfortable with the way that I looked. And she finds out in the book that beauty comes from who you are on the inside. And I had to learn that in my journey as well. So highly recommend this book by Lupita Nyong'o. This is a book called Stay This Way Forever, written by Lindsay Davis. She's a journalist, and she writes, I think, from an inspiration that she gets from her own, the inspiration that she gets from her own son. And her own son helps her to understand that he's seeing the world through the eyes of innocence. And we all want our young people to remain innocent and to remain filled with wonder and awe. So this book, Stay This Way Forever, is fantastic. Hair Love is another book that kind of highlights the relationship between a daughter and a father. It also shines a light on what it means to be African American and have hair that needs to be sometimes tamed. And I write a little bit about this in the book as well. This book is called The Day You Begin by Jacqueline Woodson. And this book is really special for me because it talks about how we're all unique and how we're all different. And this gives us the opportunity to tell our own stories because they're all very, very important. And the last book I want to share with you is a book by Misty Copeland called Bunheads. And this book was really important to me because it kind of leans on what we do at Freedom Readers when we share books that have words in them that our young people may not all know how to read. When I read this book, I listened to Misty read it out loud on a video, and I was able to learn some of the terms that she uses in her ballerina life. I remember when I was growing up as a child and I would be in church and I would read the words that we were singing in the hymnal. And that's how I picked up on a lot of the words that I learned when I was growing up. And so at Freedom Readers, we have a theme song, and we'll have the words of the theme song on a screen or in a book, and we'll have the young people follow along so that they can hear the pronunciation of some of the words that they may not know. So those are the books that I wanted to share with you, and I want to just take a couple minutes to very quickly tell you what this Freedom Readers is that I'm talking about. It's an after-school and summer literacy program that I developed in 2010. At that time, we were going into public housing communities. We were exclusively meeting in the community centers. We moved on to meeting in some churches, and now we meet in some schools. What we do is meet weekly for 90 minutes, and we connect young people who are interested in developing their reading skills with adults in the community who love to read and love to share books. And so we give these partnerships an opportunity to build relationships, to talk more about a theme that we might set up for the time. Our theme for this summer was, how does your garden grow? So we talked a lot about what it takes for farmers to grow fruits and vegetables. We talked about bees. We talked about worms. We talked about a lot of different things doing this theme, but we start each one of our meetings with a theme song. And one of our other themes, the theme was the Olympics, and we had a tiki torch that we used to walk around the room and pretend that it was the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. And so the theme song just gives us an opportunity to move, to inject some energy into what we're doing. And then after the theme song, we might watch a video about the theme. We might read a particular book about the theme, and then we will move into some snack time. And during that snack time, the young people and the tutors, they get the opportunity to talk about some of the things they've seen in the video and just to kind of connect on a human level. Then we take 45 minutes of the 90 minutes for the scholar and the tutor to read together. So it's a one-to-one connection. We ask the tutor to find books that might be interesting to the scholars, and those books might be just a little bit above their reading level, but it will give them the opportunity to hear more about something that they're interested in. We then give the scholar an opportunity to read on the level that they've been reading on in school, and that gives them the opportunity to practice what they've already been learning. At the end of their time together, the tutor and the scholar will have a conversation about a speech that the scholar is going to be asked to make before they leave. And so they have a template. We ask them to talk about a particular thing, but they get the opportunity to stand up in front of an entire room. There could be 40 people in the room. And we train them in making eye contact and projecting their voices and doing all of those great things that make public speakers great. Before they leave, they can pick up a brand new book from a table that's near the door, and we want them to take those books home so that they can build their own home libraries. So those are the things that are really important to us at Freedom Readers, and that 90 minutes is always interactive. It's always moving, because we never want to lose any of the young people, and we want to keep them engaged the entire time. Finally, before I move on to questions, I want to tell you very quickly that in my book, I've included some things that you can do with the young people in your life to keep them engaged in reading and to help them build their literacy skills. The first thing, and I'll just say that there are 5 R's here that you can think about. The first thing you need to keep in mind is that you need to receive, and that means sit and listen to the young person that you're working with. In the book, you'll find something called an interest inventory, and that will give you the opportunity to ask questions of the young person that you're working with. Find out what their favorite color is, their favorite movie, their favorite book, their favorite people, and just sit there and kind of absorb all of what they want to tell you about what's going on in their life at the time. What we found out is that when we take these interest inventories, it gives us a better chance of connecting a young person with a book that they're going to love. Because what we found is that when we make the right connection with the right book, then kids start to just get excited about what it is that they're reading. They're not just thinking about decoding letters and words, but they're thinking about how this reading is satisfying their curiosity. So the first thing we have to do is receive from the child. The second thing we need to do is research. How can we find the kinds of books that are going to stimulate young people, that are going to get them excited? How can we find the genres that are going to be the right ones for them? If they have read lots of poems in the past, maybe we can introduce them to books that have mysteries in them. Maybe we can just broaden their horizon when it comes to genres. The next thing we ask, the third R, is that we record what it is that we're reading with the young people. That helps us to go back and figure out if they are gravitating toward a certain author or if they like a certain series. And it also gives the child a sense of accomplishment about what it is that they have read, how many pages, how many books. We like to keep track of that. The fourth R is read aloud. No matter how old a child is, it's still a good idea to read aloud with them. Kids begin to hear your voice in their heads as they're reading silently, and that helps them to move closer to that place of fluency that they want to reach. And finally, the last of the 5 R's is respond. And I say here in the book that reading is a social act. And that means that we all want to respond to what it is that we're reading in some way. Sometimes we draw a picture. Sometimes we can write a poem about what it is that we've read. But we all want to have a conversation with someone about reading that inspires us and reading that helps us think more deeply. So that last R is respond. These are all the principles that we keep in mind at Freedom Readers and what we would recommend for everyone who's at home and trying to make sure that their children or the young people in their lives are really moving forward when it comes to literacy. You know, I think literacy is one of the most important foundational skills that we can share with young people. And when we are working with kids who live in low-income communities or children who are vulnerable, it is especially important that we place an emphasis on reading. It feels like something that should just be second nature, something that we shouldn't necessarily have to think or talk about. But when we look at the way that our test scores are shaking out, when we see that those kids who live in those particular communities are underperforming, then we do need to have a serious conversation about what it is that we can do to help them move forward. Because if we don't, then we're really not giving them the access that they need to be able to reach their full potential and realize all of their dreams. So for me, literacy and working with literacy and making sure that people understand how important it is, it's a political act. And it's something that I've dedicated my life to and will continue to do because I think it's so important, not only to our communities, but to the health and the future of our entire nation. So with that, I'll open the floor for any questions you might have.
All right, so I'm back. Okay, so one question that we have from the audience is, what grade does your program start with?
So our program is designed to work with young people, kindergarten to 5th grade. So when I envisioned this, I thought that we could create something that could be available for moms and kids when they're really, really small, from the time they're infants all the way to the time that they're ready to graduate from high school. To this point in the 10-year history of our program, we've really done a great job of building our K-5 program. So that's like, we've taken some 4-year-olds, but mostly 5 years old to about 10 years old. And then just before the pandemic came around, we were doing more work with our middle school program, which we call our advanced placement prep program, because we want those kids in that program to be making straight A's in their classes so that they'll have more of an opportunity to go on to those advanced classes in school.
Okay, so this is a question just out of curiosity
All
from
right.
me. There's a Frederick Douglass quote that says, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." And I'm just curious, does your title "Forever Free" come from that quote?
It absolutely does. You are right on the money. And so I write a lot about Frederick Douglass in my book because when I first encountered his writing, I think I came across a lot of his quotations before I actually sat down and read his autobiography and read David Black's biography of him. And it just fascinated me that his writing seemed so relevant. It kind of felt like he was speaking to us from a television and not from, hundreds of years, 100 years ago. So I was excited to hear more about what he had to share and what he offered. And the story that he tells about learning how to read while he was still enslaved and how that moment kind of transformed everything for him, that led to the work that I would end up doing in my life. And so that's why we're called Freedom Readers. And that's why the book is called Forever Free.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Since the topic of COVID popped up earlier, how has COVID-19 impacted our educators' methods on teaching, especially with accessibility to low-income families during this time of isolation?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. The thing that I think bothered me most during the entire time that we were doing this self isolation, I kept thinking about these statistics that I heard about kids who were not participating in the virtual school. And the number of kids that just didn't engage at all is, I think, alarming and astronomical. So we've got to do something. We've got to figure out a way to reach out to those families, kids that may have been struggling already. Just try to figure out what we can do to help those young people increase their literacy skills. I know that teachers have had to adapt really quickly. They've had to figure out ways to keep young people engaged virtually through a computer screen when it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to do when the kids were sitting in front of them in the classroom. And so those adaptations have a lot to do with leaning on the technology. One thing that I learned, and I just discovered this recently, you could actually go to Netflix and watch a series called Bookmark, and you can watch a lot of these authors that I shared with you today reading their own books on Netflix. And so the episodes are like 8 or 9 minutes long, but you can follow along in the book or you can be exposed to the book without having the book in front of you. So all of those adaptations have been, in some cases, I think, extremely challenging for educators, but a lot of them have done an extremely powerful job. Many of them have read books out loud through Facebook Live or through YouTube channels. They've recorded these stories so that young people and families can have access to them whenever they want. I was a big fan of Reading Rainbow when I grew up. And I think that LeVar Burton is still reading books out loud. You can actually listen to his podcast and just find a lot of innovative ways to connect with books today.
Yeah, especially with technology nowadays, I feel like there are more options to find reading materials. I know that a lot of bookstores have kind of disappeared, not just throughout this pandemic, but throughout the decades. And it's just nice that there is an option to borrow, say, like an ebook or go on Netflix, like you said, and have those educational resources. Um, so I'm guessing that a lot of teachers this past year and a half, they've been pretty burnt out, especially new teachers. Do you have any advice for new teachers who struggle to make reading fun for reluctant readers, or I guess like fun to learn for readers who are struggling?
I remember when I was a new teacher, and I think that what I wanted to do in the classroom at that time was imitate the teachers that I had that I loved. And I heard someone say once that being a teacher, being in that profession, that is the only profession where you can be an apprentice for 12 years. Like you're watching somebody do what you end up doing in your career. For me, it wasn't necessarily the best fit. I was struggling as I tried to imitate those people because I needed to find out more about the young people who were sitting right in front of me. I needed to be able to craft a curriculum that would speak to them, that would get them engaged, and that would somehow reflect their lived experience. And so, my advice for new teachers would be do the best you can to receive from the students that you're working with. Find out what it is that makes them tick. Find out how you can connect with who they are and celebrate the strengths that they bring to the table instead of trying to correct everything that you think that might be wrong or add on everything that they may not have. I think the first step in the process is being able to celebrate young people where they are and for what they bring to the table.
That's some great advice. Okay, so we have a question asking, is there a template for replicating your program elsewhere?
So if you're interested in replicating the program, I would advise you to reach out to us at our website. That's freedomreaders.org. And we'd love to have a conversation with you about what it is that we're doing. And we'd love to offer you as much support as possible if you'd like to have a Freedom Readers type gathering wherever you are. So once you read the book, you'll understand how it works. You'll get a sense of the model. And then you can probably be off and running from there.
Okay, next question is, what are your thoughts on banned books? Are there any books you believe should be retired from the school's reading lists or at least taught from a different perspective? So I'm guessing a non-mainstream white perspective, taught from a perspective of a marginalized voice.
That is such a fantastic question. I'd like to thank whoever offered that question for offering it. My perspective on banned books. I really feel as if kids should have the opportunity to read lots of different material, lots of different ideas from lots of different perspectives. I strongly believe that parents do have the authority and have the right to say, okay, I don't want my kid to be reading this book. But I don't necessarily feel as if we need to take that power out of their hands and put it into somebody else's hands. When I was a classroom teacher in the mid 90s, I was given a list of books that the powers that be thought I needed to teach. And a lot of those books were considered to be classics or books that were in the canon. And I didn't necessarily believe that those books would be the right books for the kids that were in front of me at the time. So it was a little bit of a disconnect and a lot of struggle, but we did the best that we could. I think that we need to definitely diversify the kinds of books that we are requiring all of our young people to read. There's a researcher that coined a term that I really love, and she talks about having books that are windows and books that are mirrors. So that I think that all kids need an opportunity to see through a window into a perspective that is different from theirs, but they also need opportunities to see into a mirror so that they can see themselves in the pages of books as well. So it's really important that we keep in mind that we need to offer kids in school and outside of school a variety of different books so that they get to choose. Research also tells us that choice is one of the number one motivators for young people when they're trying to develop a reading habit.
Yes, I remember, I think it was a survey by Lee and Low last year it came out saying that only 5% of books that came out in 2020 were by Black authors. And you think that we're making a lot of progress, but I mean, we are, but there can definitely be more done. So that ties into my next question. What are I guess, like the next steps that educators and parents can make now?
You mean in terms of bringing in more books?
Yeah, bringing in more books and
From writers of color and
writers of color and
characters of
marginalized.
color.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So, as I said earlier, I really feel like literacy, reading, writing, learning how to verbally communicate, all of this stuff I feel like is a political act, right? So I think that parents and classroom teachers really have to make a strong commitment to this and say to the people who are making these decisions, I know that this is what's best for kids and this is what we need to do. I strongly believe that this is one of our civil rights frontiers. And if we are bringing books to kids that are not really igniting a fire in them, then we're not really providing the kind of access to books that we say that we're providing. So we've got to break down these walls, and we have to be very adamant and very relentless and persistent about making sure that the legislators who pass the laws that pertain to schools, that they hear what we are saying and they act on what we're saying. That I think is extremely important.
So you've been you've studied the education system for a very long time. So what are the most surprising facts you've learned throughout your career as an educator and also in researching for your book?
That's a really great question as well. I think one of the most surprising facts I learned was back when I was in undergrad, and I thought that I wanted to be an attorney. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And I'll tell you why. I used to watch a show called LA Law, and one of the characters on that show drove a Porsche, a candy apple red Porsche 944. And so I had a conversation with my dad, and I said to him, I want to drive a car like that. And he says, well, maybe you want to think about being a lawyer. And that was probably 100% why I wanted to choose that particular field. I took the LSAT, didn't do very well on that particular test, and decided that that might not have been the best road for me. But I was an education major at the time, and in one of my classes, I remember reading that the number of children of color was going to explode in our education system across the nation over the next, they said, 20 to 50 years. And then the number of educators of color would drop a whole lot during that time. So I thought to myself, if I give 5 years to the classroom, then I could be a part of giving back. I could be a part of making sure that the scales were balanced a little bit. As it turned out, though, education kind of stole my heart. It has become my life's work and something that I am happy that I have the opportunity to pursue. But just thinking about the statistics there, the number of kids of color who will never have a teacher of color in the classroom, it's pretty much out of balance, and it's a little bit alarming, as I said earlier, because there's research that also tells us that if a Black kid has one Black teacher, then she can make, or he can make it an extremely significant impact on how that child learns and how they see themselves if they are a good teacher. So, that was one of the statistics I looked at. I also looked at the number of kids of color that we see in our special education classroom versus the number of kids of color we'll see in our advanced placement classrooms. And that disparity really did trouble me as well. So looking at these inequities, looking at these things that are happening in schools that are not necessarily positive things when it comes to kids of color, those are the things that kind of motivate me to continue to do the work that I do.
And our next question is, how are we going to put reading back in the classroom when the emphasis now is on testing?
So I think that I heard your question. There was a little bit of interference in there before it came across, but I think you
Sorry,
said...
do you want me to reread it?
Yes, please. That would be great.
Okay, yeah, sure. How are we going to put reading back in the classroom when the emphasis now is on testing?
It's another good question, and it takes me back to the answer that I gave a little bit earlier. Pushing forward literacy, especially when it comes to the most vulnerable children in our school system, is definitely a political act. And putting standardized tests in perspective, in the right context, that's going to have to be, I believe, another political move. We're going to have to be able to put people in the places of power where they can make the decisions that really benefit our kids and that make sense for our kids. I know that the emphasis right now is on standardized testing. In the book, I call for a ban on standardized testing and more of a focus on student progress in portfolios and ways for students to show that they're actually learning and moving forward. I'm not opposed to assessment. I'm not opposed to figuring out where a child is at a particular time. But I am opposed to an overemphasis on tests that might be just a snapshot of where one kid is on one particular day. So we're going to have to be, again, relentless. We're going to have to be adamant, and it may take being out in the streets and just saying to people, this is extremely important, and this is what we need to consider, and this is how we need to make this right.
Right. Those were the questions that I had in the box. But if you guys have any more questions, please feel free to send them in. I'm going to ask Tracy a couple more of my own questions to buy you guys some time. So personally, I come from a family where my family's primary language is not English. And when I immigrated to this country, I had to kind of learn how to read by myself and learn the language by myself. So my question is, like, your program, does it help bilingual families, and how do they help families participate in helping teach their kid to read? Like, do they learn how to read English alongside them, or are there better tricks?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to just kind of get some insight into what it was like for you when you came here and you were learning to read English.
It was a long time ago. I'm sure it's different now.
Yeah, absolutely. But language is something that we think about and talk about on a daily basis, because code switching is something that we have to do a lot. It's not necessarily the same as being bilingual, but it does have a lot to do with understanding the space that you're in and understanding what's acceptable in that particular space. But to answer your question specifically, we've had a number of Spanish speakers that are a part of the Freedom Readers program. And what we have done is we've ordered books that are bilingual. And we've had quite a few of the kids who were speaking English fluently read those books with their parents who weren't speaking English fluently at the time. And so that's another reason that I'm excited about the fact that we can send these books home. And there's a lot of interaction and a lot of growth in diving into those books together that I think is extremely special. So as our program continues to grow and we have people who are speaking different languages, we will always do the best that we can to make sure that there are books available to reflect the experiences and the backgrounds of everyone with whom we're working. And so that's why I think it's a great asset for us to be able to have this one-to-one model where you have an adult working with a young person that can say, okay, I'm going to go out and make sure that you have everything you need for your unique and specific experience. It can be very, very tailored in that way.
I think that's a very good way to go about it.
Yeah.
That brings up the questions. Do you use audiobooks in teaching how to read for younger readers? Because I guess for me, because I didn't have someone teaching me how to read like one-on-one like your program does, it would have helped if I had, I guess, even like an audiobook to teach me how some of the words sounded, because English does not make sense in a lot of pronunciation terms.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The rules are so strange and they're broken in so many different ways. We haven't used audiobooks in our 90-minute meetings because we do have an adult that's there to actually read out loud with the child, and the child can read to the adult. But what we do is we have, like I said earlier, there's a theme song that we use for during our weekly meetings. So if the theme song is something like Lean on Me, we would play that theme song at the beginning of each one of the meetings, and we would show the words and have the kids point to the words as they're singing the song. So in that way, they're kind of understanding the pronunciation of those words and internalizing them as well. We use video clips that have words at the bottom of the screen as well, so that kids can hear words and see them at the same time and begin to make those connections in their brains. So the audiobooks are something that we recommend for kids who are doing their reading outside of our weekly meetings. And I just think that audiobooks are absolutely fabulous. For this particular book, I had the opportunity to read my own audiobook. And so that was quite an experience for me to be in the booth, to be reading the words that I wrote myself. There are some words that I've decided to put on a banned list that I probably will not use those words anymore as I am writing, because it just gives you a different kind of experience of writing and of the book. So I highly recommend checking out the audiobook for Forever Free.
Okay, so we have a few more questions that came in.
Okay.
Okay, so do you work with colleges and universities in their teacher training programs?
Yes, that's a great question. So when the shutdown came around, we decided to pivot just a little bit. And so we created something called the Reading Lab. So instead of tutors and scholars meeting together in person, they meet virtually, like we're meeting now. And we had the opportunity to partner with the local college. And so what we do is invite the young people to meet with us online. We give them a reading assessment to tell them where their reading level is when they start with us. And then they have the weekly meetings with the potential teachers who are in a teacher education class. And so they're doing this as a part of the course. Their instructor is working with them every step of the way. And we also give them training through an online platform called Moodle. What I also love is that those college students are writing letters weekly to the kids that they're tutoring, and those kids are writing back to them, and they send those through the mail. So that's one of the ways that they are interacting around the books that they're reading together. We mail the books out to both the tutor and the scholar, and then they get the opportunity to discuss them virtually. So that was a great question, and something that I'm super excited about that just kind of developed within the last year for our program.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I really do think that's going to be a part of the next wave in education. You know, as we look back on this year of self-isolation, how much kids have kind of maybe missed out on in terms of instruction. we can use technology to actually make sure every kid has a tutor or somebody who's working with them individually to make sure that they get the kind of instruction that they need. So I'm excited about that.
I'm excited too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have time for one last question. So this will be our
Okay.
last one for today. Do you
Wonderful.
think your program could be adjusted somehow to include children with learning and language disabilities, since we brought up bilingual families earlier?
Right, right. I do believe that the program can be adjusted in a lot of ways, especially through our reading lab. We found that a lot of the scholars that we work with who do have disabilities may not necessarily connect as well through the virtual tutoring. But I do feel as if because we have that one-to-one relationship, we can recruit the right tutors to work with the right scholars and make sure that all of those kids, no matter what they bring to the table, can have access to this high energy environment and can be surrounded by books. So, absolutely, I think that it would work extremely well.
Okay, so let me bring my screen back to normal. All right, here we go.
Okay.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you, Tracy, for taking the time to speak with us. Thank you to everyone who tuned in and sent us questions. It was such a lovely talk. And thank you for all of the book recommendations, too, at the beginning of the event.
Well, I had a fantastic time. Thank you so much for inviting me and for being such a wonderful host. This was a great conversation and a lot of fun.
Okay, so for those of you who tuned in late, don't worry. A replay of this talk will be available after the broadcast ends. And if you would like to buy a copy of Forever Free, just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. It will take you to our website where you can complete your purchase. And I think that about does it. Stay safe, everyone. Take care of yourself and keep reading. All right. Good night, everyone.